Guys, it's your boy, Madness and Civilization. I keep forgetting about my intellectual quest because I have to have a healthy sense of shame. I can't constantly walk around thinking that I'm hot shit just because I've got a cool intellectual project which seems to proceed in a type of chronology where basic insights get built into structures that carry me up and up and up to new dimensions of insights. If you wanted to use some enticing language, perhaps as a theological fishmonger would, to sell your soul. We need to speak of the border between sanity and madness, and how it really makes life kind of difficult for an OG like myself, because I have to be wary that I'm not turned into a complete retard by the system, which is a common struggle anyone involved with the system, which is increasingly everyone in society, because we live in a highly technologized, integrated superstructure, and so you are monitored, and your compliance with system existence is carefully engineered from behind the scenes, hitting every key, using every technique and every school of thought in its incessant creation of tools to control the human will. The will to power being life, and controlling the will to power being the aim of power, the aim of conquering others and one's own very self. The will to power turned against itself. And so madness and civilization. I've been fanboying on Heidegger, but I've been talking a lot of shit about Foucault, even though I've not really spent a lot of time reading Foucault. I just think he's a bad philosopher because he's French, and so that's pretty much it. And I did get his book, Madness and Civilization, and it makes canonical sense. It makes sense in the canon of my own discourse surrounding knowledge, which necessarily needs to end in madness. It needs to end with a contention with the question of madness. What is it? And how does it operate? What function does the term madness serve in current society? Foucault would say it was conformity. Conformity is the main aim of the concept of madness. Policing mannerisms, policing expressions, ways of being, acting in society on the great world stage. Regulated, pasteurized, monopolized. The iron grip social norms, perhaps of the inauthentic they, the diffuse, vague feeling of the beast of public opinion. And mental institutions are, in a way, the battleground of the cosmic war in this last absurd stage of the story of knowledge and the truth. The chapters dealing with madness. The strange and bizarre war is fought in those places. Subtly, and so encrypted that one must necessarily be mad to understand it. The logical conclusion of historical development. With the birth of knowledge came the birth of the potentiality for madness. And this is an important point because the medical profession is kind of the symbolic profession of modernism. And so it is highly linked to the modern identity. And the rational modernist is very often bound by a faith in the institution of medicine as a very foundational building block of his or her worldview. And so doctors become priests in the church of progress, in the triumph of science over the elements. And the gift of science giving human beings a capability of conquering its own physical limitations for a while. And the medical field, of course, encounters the strange and creates a borderland. And in this borderland, the war between the mad and the sane is waged. Who is who? Who is who? And so, in connection with psychiatric treatment, which one may need to seek out at points in life, the idea of the pharmacological solution, the chemical solution to madness becomes the defining religious axiom upon which all interaction must necessarily be built. Otherwise, you will be punished. And this is, well, really just a clear reflection of the problem with modern science, which is what the insight of the phenomenologists Heidegger and thus in turn Foucault is that the Cartesian mathematical measurability based empirical sciences can only do so much in terms of producing technological innovations, but it doesn't allow us to achieve greater clarity in viewing the truth about our own being. And so it becomes hyper accentuated, this conflict in the battlefield, which is the mental hospital, because mental malaise is intrinsically linked with this most fundamental question: a person's being. Which is why in mental hospitals every domain of culture collide together. Everything from scientific culture to artistic culture to religious culture, all of it binds together in a beautifully magical way, which allows the conflict to assume its familiar character of slightly dark absurdity. So, who is who? Are the lunatics running the asylum? Is the incessant faith in the unmoved mover and logical proofs really that different from the grasping of the madman? Is there not something inherently neurotic about Descartes' thought experiment of the demon, to base one's inquiries into the nature and value of the truth on some hypothetical which necessarily is rooted in the domain of the demonic? There must be a ever-present paranoia, a devil to be running from, to motivate action at all, it seems, in the eyes of the great rationalist and mathematical thinker René Descartes. In order to really want to grasp the essence of beings in the world, we must be running from this demon, the whipcracker of metaphysics, perhaps, from which we scurry to our lumps of wax or apples falling out of trees. Is there not something childish about the scientist? Isn't there equal childishness with the scientist's strange obsessions with natural phenomena as the madman's? The madman and his obsessions. Who is who? That really becomes the central pressing question on everyone's lips within the walls of the hospital. It is a war where nobody knows what side they're on. Now, there are some steps in the discourse surrounding treatment of mental illness um, that have allowed us to describe in a serious way stuff such as a person's environment having an effect on them, and drugs working in tandem with lifestyle changes in terms of relieving some of the more known so-called mental illnesses. Um, but at the same time, with the more severe cases of mental illness, such as a fundamental distortion of reality, creating behaviors that will necessarily be perceived as insane. This clinging to the concrescence of pharmacological treatment becomes the tool by which the medical class can distance themselves from the madman. Because while the doctor may admit that he or she perhaps has a tendency to be depressed or a tendency to feel anxious when there is no need to, they will be very, very cautious to admit to any type of paranormal perception of reality, lest their ability to continue in their profession be pulled into question. And so there is a social pressure for the medical class to deny the existence of mental phenomena in a way that is real. So they pay lip service to the reality of mental phenomena in quotation marks, but always make sure to distinguish it as a secondary reality. Now, this links us to why people are so fascinated by madness, and this idea that madness is just expressions of divinity in a modern context, expressions of the magical essence of man, which at one point in our history would have been considered as normal as breathing, but which with time and the progress of technology has become increasingly alienated from us, and thus presented as something scary and mystical. As something scary and mystical. And hence all this interest in religions, the spiritual, the beyond, which is found in mental hospitals, not only among the patients, but to a very high degree among the staff as well. Aside from the jaded ones who have kind of had it with all ethereal matters. Now, antipsychotic drugs work by antagonizing dopamine receptors in the brain, which I suppose causes them to become more resilient and thus allows you to not be thrown into such extremes of expression, of emotion, by rises and falls in dopamine, which is associated with the chemical processes that are said to dictate why we do things, acting as kind of the carrot in front of the horse for human behavior. So, so it will have necessarily an effect of slowing you down somewhat and making you more resilient to stimulus. But it is not going to undo your perception of reality. And what most schizophrenics have in common is that they perceive that reality is much more than what the medical class is allowed to admit to keep their jobs. And so the disconnect between the spoken word and the lived reality becomes a constant struggle within the person's soul. And thus the schism arises, which is so characteristic of the condition of schizophrenia and other severe types of mental illnesses, or types that are considered severe, the ones that have an air of mystery associated with them, and often associated with some dread of danger, of a propensity to violence. So, is my essential position at the end of the day that mentally ill people in hospitals are just shamans who were born in the wrong time? More or less, yes. But the war between the mad and the sane always makes me laugh, because both the staff and the patients in a mental hospital are full of double agents, infiltrators, and imposters who are simply there to feast their eyes on the magical dynamic that is created when you gather all the crazies in one place. Detectives on a spiritual quest for the truth with a capital T. The mad endpoint struggle of any philosopher. Like Nicholson checking into the insane asylum for a quick little visit to dodge a jail sentence and ending up lobotomized. And ending up lobotomized. So yeah, which means that, you know, not every person, you're not necessarily shaman born in the wrong time just because you're in a mental hospital. But I think that's where the phenomenon arises. I think that's why every generation has a proportion of people that end up in mental hospitals or go about their lives in a highly ritualized, magical way. Because it is a part of our lives and it's directly linked to the causalities in physical space, in physical reality. Which is why knowledge about it is so coveted. So coveted. And that is what psychiatry is attempting to achieve. But realizing that it is impossible to dissect an organism to see its soul. So yeah, that's where the kind of inhumane aspect of medicine comes in. And anyone who knows anything about the history of medicine will understand why people are afraid of doctors. So yeah, so that's a little rant about that subject. I hope it's been enlightening. Madness in Civilization is about how psychiatry is essentially a power struggle in terms of defining the paradigm of social norms in a given time period, in a given society. And mental hospitals today are primarily interested in enforcing the norm of uh, the chemical solution to so-called mental illness. And that's tragic, but it's also very funny because the chemical solution to mental illness is just to get people high on drugs. And then there has to be like a funny song and dance about how they're gonna give you drugs without actually saying that they're getting you high on drugs. So they call it medication. Which, you know, medication, drugs, witches' brews, it all originates from the same thing. Just different types of substances putting in the body. Anyways, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. Of course, the chemical solution isn't a solution because many of these psychotropics that they give you are just not gonna help and make you addicted. So it's essentially like being hooked on street drugs. But a bit cheaper, I guess, a bit safer. I don't think your doctor is gonna come and bust your kneecaps if you don't pay back your loans for medication. But they could come and lock you up. They could choose to lock you up. Right. And so that's all I have to say for this video. Nice little half an hour. I'm gonna enjoy it. Enjoy watching it. And as always, leave a like, comment, subscribe down in my pants. And I'll see ya in the next video. Bye.